Hey, welcome to this deep dive all about 10% Happier by Dan Harris. We're going to go deep into his story. From a workaholic ABC News anchor to a much more mindful version of himself. Even if you're not in news, there's a lot to think about here. It really gets at ambition and stress and that voice we all deal with.
Yeah, and what's interesting is he doesn't start with meditation. He actually begins by talking about his career,
Right.
driven by what he called the price of security. He was so ambitious, really successful. But underneath, there was so much insecurity.
It's almost like the higher he climbed, the more he was afraid to lose. Remember that part about his mom? She noticed how everyone who runs for president has to have some kind of void they're trying to fill. Harris found that unsettling, especially when he thought about his own drive.
Right, and you see that in the culture at ABC News,
Yeah.
especially working under Peter Jennings, like that story about Jennings and the plaid jacket.
Oh, yeah. It's hard to imagine Dan Harris being dressed down for his clothes. Do you think that kind of environment just creates insecurity, even for people at the top?
Well, it definitely shows how intense that world is. But it also shows how even really accomplished people can fall into that trap. Comparing themselves to others, always needing approval. I think we all have times when our confidence takes a hit. The important thing is to learn how to deal with it without letting those moments define us.
So how does Harris deal with that pressure? Because it doesn't seem like he slows down at all. He goes even further into stressful situations.
Exactly. He becomes a war correspondent, covering conflicts in Afghanistan, Israel, Iraq, places where the stakes are incredibly high. And there's danger everywhere. There's this one story where a bullet flies right past his head. And his freeze thought is, I hope we're rolling on this.
I get that he's a journalist and the story is important, but that reaction is kind of scary, isn't it? It makes you wonder what kind of impact that has on you mentally.
Yeah, you have to wonder, at what point does that detachment become a way to cope, a way to handle the intensity of it all? Because after he comes home, Harris gets sick, and it turns out to be depression.
It's like the adrenaline and pressure were masking what was really going on. And instead of dealing with it, he starts self-medicating with cocaine and ecstasy.
Yeah, the classic example of trying to numb out uncomfortable emotions, or maybe trying to get back that feeling of excitement. But it's a temporary fix, and it just leads to more suffering.
Which brings us to that panic attack on Good Morning America. I can't imagine something more terrifying than having that happen live on TV.
It's a huge turning point in the book. Not only is it incredibly embarrassing for him, but it forces him to really face the consequences of his choices. He sees the link between the cocaine and the panic attacks, and he realizes he needs to address the issues he's been avoiding.
So this is where he finally starts looking for answers, not just quick fixes.
Right. He starts exploring self-help, but he's really skeptical at first. He meets all sorts of people, from pastors to New Age gurus. There's this funny story where his producer wants to make deeper, more meaningful stories, and Harris tells him, you should go work for NPR.
He's not into anything spiritual at this point. What changes his mind?
A book, A New Earth, by Eckhart Tolle. He's skeptical at first, but finds himself interested in Tolle's ideas about the ego. You know, that voice in your head that's always judging, comparing, worrying.
Oh, yeah, definitely. We all have that voice, don't we?
Well, that's the ego, according to Tolle. And he argues that so much of our suffering comes from identifying with that voice. He says real peace comes from being aware of the present moment.
It's like taking a step back from your thoughts and just observing them. Easier said than done, though, right?
Oh, absolutely. And even Harris struggles with how to actually do it. He wants to know how to put these ideas into practice.
So he gets the ideas but wants to know how to use them, how to actually apply them.
Exactly, and that's where Mark Epstein comes in. He's a psychiatrist who combines Western psychology and Buddhism. Harris calls him a jubo.
I love that. So this sounds more practical, less, out there.
Yeah, Epstein's very down to earth. He suggests Harris try meditation, but of course Harris resists. He thinks it's for, like, hippies or something. Not for a serious news guy.
Right. It's like he thinks meditation will make him soft, less driven, which I get it. We're taught that success comes from constantly pushing, never slowing down.
Yeah, it's a hard habit to break. But eventually, even Harris realizes he needs a new approach.
Yeah.
So he agrees to go to a silent meditation retreat. And it really pushes him to his limits.
I can imagine going from the news world to total silence for days.
He hates it at first.
Yeah.
He's so uncomfortable, bored. He talks about wanting to yell at a statue of the Buddha.
Wow. Okay.
But then things start to change. During walking meditation, he has this experience of choiceless awareness.
That sounds intense, but what does it even mean? We can't just turn off our thoughts.
It's not about turning them off. It's about noticing them without judging them. Like you're the sky and your thoughts are clouds. You don't have to get caught up in every cloud. You can just let them pass by.
So mindfulness.
Hey,
What happens to Harris after that? Does he become like a Zen master?
not quite. He still struggles, gets frustrated. But he sees how meditation can help. Create space between his thoughts and his reactions. And this leads him to another practice. Meditation. It's about cultivating loving kindness and compassion.
Okay, I think we could all use a little more of that, but wasn't Harris resistant to that too?
He was. He thought compassion was a weakness. But during a metta session, he has this breakthrough. He feels this intense love and gratitude for his mom and niece. It changes his whole view of compassion. He sees that it's actually a source of strength.
Wow, that's powerful. Did this new interest in mindfulness clash with his job at all?
Yeah, there's some tension. The new president of ABC News actually tells him to stop being so zen. Harris realized he'd become a bit complacent, like he was trying so hard to detach from his ego that he wasn't striving anymore.
He needed that balance between striving for excellence and having inner peace.
Exactly. And he finds it. He incorporates mindfulness into his work, and he even ends up getting a co-anchor spot on Nightline.
So it's proof that inner work can actually help us in the real world.
For sure.
So it's not all about retreats and, esoteric practices. He finds ways to use these ideas in his everyday life. What about the science behind it all? Does Harris talk about that?
He does. He looks into the work of John Kabat-Zinn. He's the scientist who developed mindfulness-based stress reduction, or MBSR. This program brought meditation to a much wider audience, and it led to a lot of research on mindfulness.
So there's actual science to back this up.
Yes. Studies have shown that meditation can reduce stress hormones, boost the immune system, improve focus, and even change the structure of the brain.
Really?
There's this study from Harvard, people who did MBSR for 8 weeks. They had thicker gray matter in parts of the brain linked to self-awareness and compassion.
Wow, so it's not just about feeling calmer, it's actually changing our brain.
That's what the research shows. And these findings even impress people like Harris's mom and Diane Sawyer. It shows that even those who seem to have it all figured out can benefit from mindfulness.
It's a reminder that we all have those internal battles. The stress, the anxiety, the self-doubt. And mindfulness gives us tools to deal with it all.
Definitely. And those tools go beyond just meditation.
Yeah.
Harris shares some tips from Sharon Salzberg. She's a well-known meditation teacher. She talks about self-compassion and, not being a jerk.
I love that.
Yeah.
So how do we actually use these principles in our daily lives? It's easy to forget about being mindful when things get busy.
It takes practice, but even small things can make a difference. Like next time you're stressed, try taking a few deep breaths and notice what's happening in your body. That can help you come back to the present moment.
That's doable, even if you don't have time for meditation.
Exactly. And Harris's story shows that it's a journey, not a destination. There will be ups and downs. But the important thing is to keep trying, keep experimenting, and find what works for you.
Does Harris ever talk about the bigger picture, like enlightenment or the ultimate goals of meditation?
He does. He talks to Jed Brewer, who's an addiction expert.
Wow.
Brewer says the brain is like a pleasure-seeking machine, and that we can train it to be more satisfied with being present and letting go of our attachments.
So we can actually rewire our brains for happiness.
It's a really interesting idea. He also talks to Sam Harris, the neuroscientist. They discuss the possibility of sudden enlightenment experiences. Like Eckhart Tolle didn't meditate for years before his awakening.
So there's no one right way.
Right.
Does Harris ever have moments where mindfulness totally backfires?
Oh, absolutely. There's this funny story about his interview with Paris Hilton. He wants to be more compassionate, less judgmental, so he asks her this really pointed question about her fading fame. He thinks it'll be more authentic.
Oh, no.
It's a disaster. Hilton is offended. Her team is furious. The whole interview falls apart.
Oh, man.
It's a good reminder that even when we try to be mindful, we can still mess things up.
We're all human. It shows you mindfulness isn't about being perfect. It's about being, present, even when things get awkward. But what happens to Harris in the end? Does he, reach enlightenment?
I don't think he'd say he's reached some ultimate state. But one of the big things he learns is that even if we don't become perfectly enlightened, the tools of meditation can still change our lives.
Okay.
He becomes more self-aware, calmer, more resilient, not emotionless, but more present, more engaged with everything.
And that's what he means by 10% happier.
Right.
It's not about becoming some, blissful being. It's about handling the ups and downs better.
Yeah, exactly. It's about learning a new way to be, a way to experience more joy and peace, even when life is crazy. And what's great is, Harris shows you don't have to change everything. He doesn't run off to a monastery. He finds ways to make mindfulness work in his job, his relationships, his life.
What I like about this book is that it feels real. Harris isn't talking down to us, he's sharing his own struggles, and he's funny about it.
I think that's what makes it so inspiring. He's so open about his doubts, his failures. It reminds us that mindfulness isn't about perfection, it's about progress.
It's about showing up, even when things are tough, and finding ways to be more peaceful, more clear, more joyful. So as we finish up this deep dive into 10% Happier, what are some key takeaways you hope listeners get from Harris's story?
I hope it makes them curious
Yeah.
about their own potential for growth. Maybe it'll inspire them to try meditation or other mindfulness stuff. Or maybe it just reminds them to be kind to themselves and that small changes can make a difference.
Yeah, whatever resonates with them. I hope they feel encouraged to start their own journey toward a better, happier life. After all, who doesn't want to be a little happier?
Exactly. It's a journey worth taking.
Well, this has been great. It's been awesome exploring 10% Happier with you.
My pleasure. See you next time.
And to you, listening, keep exploring, keep learning, and maybe you'll find yourself 10% happier too. Thanks for joining us.